welcome. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, my patrons, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. All within the narrow purview of one point of view out of thousands about what that means to be a Pilates instructor. So I think I've been missing or not getting recorded what I have broadcast. No, I never even got it broadcast because there is not only a link that you need to provide or want to provide, as well as a key. And if you just Google Yahoo live stream setup and find somewhere that makes sense to you in that, there's this key you need that you can reset, and then it hides like after 5 seconds, because anybody that has that key can then live broadcast to your channel. So it's something that you don't want to leave out in the open or visible for long. And so I found that out on my laptop, but I need the information on my phone, and instead of writing it down, I sent an email to myself, and you may do this already on your own, with the address and the password, so that I could cut and paste that into, maybe I'm cutting my nose off and somebody will be live streaming before I know it. But if it's not about Pilates, it's not moi. Three things even that I have notes on, but okay, 3 things. The title is YouTube and Facebook. So I've been working on trying to get the right key into the right place at the right time to actually go live stream in on Yahoo. And I suggest you be careful with doing that if you do that, but that's what you have to do in order to do it. Right? You have to know where to send it and what your key is in order to live stream from you. Meaning whoever owns that account you signed on to or that you have with Google that is hosting that. So when you think of YouTube, think of the bigger picture being Google, and you're operating within Google's domain of allowance. So, Facebook. Number 2 out of 3. Number 2, your thinking is a thunderstorm. I've been absent because I've been on a road trip and gotten to see great weather, and your thinking is a thunderstorm, and yet, what do I want to say about this? To survive, you want to direct it. And maybe that's melodramatic and oversimplistic, but for me, my mind likes to think, and it just takes off thinking and pursuing any avenue of dispersal of thinking like a lightning bolt. Unless you do what I suggest you do at the end of every broadcast, which is to direct your thinking. Okay? So it's a thunderstorm, thought, thinking, it just... So not only feed it, but direct it. And then my last comment on that, typical me, after to survive, we want to direct it. And then what falls out of that is direct your thinking with what? So then number 2 is, that was number 2. Number 3 is linear versus dynamic. And so if I haven't just totally lost you or your interest from my abstractions and dalliances and generalities, number 3 is linear versus dynamic. And I just saw on social media an image, not a video, an image of a person in the open leg rocker. And it brings forth in me a discussion with you about the difference between linear versus dynamic. And I don't know that the verses is apt. Maybe it's more, there's linear and there's dynamic, and linear certainly exists and is what it is, but it's used with will and intent. It's reached for with will and intent, not just to be linear, but to be more uniformly engaged. And that's one view, MMP, out of thousands. And so, in linear open leg rocker, the tension is straight. That's, I think, what I'm trying to say. The tension is straight without accessing dynamic at the elbows and the knees. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to give you an idea of 2 things I'm talking about. One is linear tension, and the other is dynamic tension, and that as good and as nice as linear tension is, if you're after developing the body uniformly, if this whole body effort is serious, then to do that, the MMP point of view is that you use linear tension to more fully engage more dynamically. And specifically, what do I mean by that? I mean by unlocking the knees and having some form of tension in the elbow, to utilize its dynamic as an axis of rotation. And, it's just MMP to say unlock your knees and establish an endpoint of tension at the metatarsals. So it goes against early Joe and matches up the way Joe, to me, in an image of his, has an endpoint of tension at the metatarsals. So it's not a pointed foot. And regardless of whether there's evidence there or not, though evidence really does help, for what I'm pointing to is that unlocking knees by establishing an endpoint of tension at the metatarsals, when we're talking the legs, and by engaging in oppositional torque through the arms and giving the elbow an opportunity to contribute to the target. See, this whole broadcast is about what is the target, and the target is whole body. The target is uniform engagement of the musculature in performance of the effort. That's MMP's point of view. And so as far as I know, this small one point of view out of thousands. It has to do with what Joe said in his book and what you can get to out of what he said. And in my opinion, this point of view of MMP is that there is an experience that Joe wrote about that you can experience for yourself. And there we're off diving down into being complete, or how does he say it, coordinated, fully concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. So know your Joe in that sense, especially the 5 things that I talk about to be a presenter. Know your Joe. And by that I mean know Joe's definition, Joe's promise, and Joe's sequence. And then there are other worthy quotes of Joe's. And the more you look for that kind of stuff, the more the familiar the ones become that people are most familiar with. So, there's a big, because it looks like there's a few hundred people. Way to go. What are they calling it? A Congress, I think, at Joe's birthplace. And a packed house with a bunch of people up on the stage and chairs. And it seemed like it would be fun to be there, and it was nice to get a look at that, right? Probably broadcast live. You take your chances on comments, maybe, I don't know. But see, all of that's controllable by you and YouTube and your setup, right? So I'm recommending that you learn how to live stream and keep in mind what's important and what's not, and what the dangers are and not. Don't broadcast your password, and know how to reset it whenever you wish. There's a good one. And that's just Google, YouTube, live stream setup. So with this Congress that's going on, I think the energy is really exciting, and hearing talk of Joe in any regard is thrilling, and is immediate empathy. It made me wish I was still in a traveling mode where I could envision someday going, which brought home how this is a Congress that happens at Joe's birthplace. Because the person that they recorded with the opening was saying that she was on her way. The taxi driver asked why she was in town, and she replied to go to a Pilates Congress. And the taxi driver said, "Do you know he was born here?" So to me, that's really good brand awareness, and yet restricted to, so, and yet unlimited by focusing on being attached to where Joe was born. You know? And so in quotes, Pilates is an homage to the biology we have in the physics we're trying to survive in. Pilates is an homage to the bodies we have, well, except see, well, to the biology we have and the physics we're trying to survive in, that's biology and physics. That's as much as Michael Miller-Pilates, this one point of view, wants to focus on. And within that, it's about biology and physics. And that's the realm in which MMP looks at in the pursuit of survival. Recognizing that humanity and imagination can go far beyond what we know with reproducible results within the world of the science of biology and physics. Okay? So you can easily define the MMP point of view by saying, well, it's based on the science, we know about in biology and physics. So within that regard, it's pretty limited, right? But that it's field. It's very strange, and I love it, I guess, because I do it. Going on a ride with a good companion. And that companion for me would be Rose. And Rose is my ride. And my ride currently is a 20-something teen Subaru Outback. But because I can lie down in it. And recently learned how important it is not to be lying on a downcline with your head at the low end, because the liquid all flows right out of you, and I immediately cramp in my lower extremities. You know, I wish I'd made a better point about linear versus dynamic. In the grip of open leg rocker, there's a relationship of some kind between if there is contact between the hands and the legs. Is there an adduction going on between the legs in order to facilitate a deeper engagement of the grip at the hips? Is that a press out or a press in? Are the legs pulling against the hands, pressing against the hands, or reaching away? See, all why? If linear is the only way you understand it, especially if the idea of whole body through core nu tension is unknown, what I see, is a linear expression of what is meant to be more than that. It's meant to be more dynamically engaged. And why is that? See, if you're bored, if you're still listening by now, what's the answer to that? Why is that important? Because the more uniformly engaged you are, the lighter you are moving through space. And if the lighter you are moving through space, the more likelihood you have to do what? To survive. Right? In seeing the Congress and a long row of people that have great things to share about Joseph Pilates and his method, it makes it all the more obvious to me how narrow the MMP point of view is, because it's an ideal point of view. And in that, I think you can see right through it. And if there's any validity to the ideal within Joe's work, it makes it all the more apparent. Now, if you're not interested in the ideal and want to stay within the realm of it only being inexplicable, right, there we go. You can't explain it because Joe never explained it, and it is what it is, and there's all the diversity in what it's become. Well, is there any difference between what it's become and where it came from? And is there any consistency to where it came from that exists throughout wherever it went to? So as good as the image of the open leg rocker looked, it looked very linear without being dynamic. And maybe that was what was wanted, of course, or maybe not. I think, more than not, it's obvious when a person is lined up between shoulders and ears. Actually, when the ears line up more than not with the hips and the shoulders, when the head comes into place and lines up where you have 3 points on a line, that stands out on a line. But really, to get it, you have to go through coronary tension to get that, which automatically, implicitly, through eons of evolution, reaches into uniform engagement to survive the gravity jungle. When you go after dynamic tension, you end up at core new tension, better aligned, more uniformly engaged, and in more control. And if that ends up defining you as an ideal expression versus a historical reenactment, being able to do both, see, the whole thing about MMP's point of view is that it comes down to sensation. You don't have to be brilliant in your mind and thinking to come to an understanding, a grasp of what MMP points to as an ideal within, and that there's it rides on sensational validity rather than intellectual approbation. But I didn't use the right word. Felt good though. Intellectual interpretation or explanation, or some kind of argument or intellectuality that goes beyond or discounts or dismisses what exists outside of the thinking, which we know is what? Observing. Body, mind, and spirit, being, thinking, and observing. Puts you in connection with the universe faster than light. That's my claim, and I'm sticking to it. So, on that long road trip, there's usually a long audio book. And from that audio book, being earliest, to understand, actually being earliest with the data, so having the information that matters to your survival, having it before anybody else really helps, and to the extent that that is only legal, I mean, then being able to make of what is of data available to anybody else, right? The more complex the data, the more intellect it takes to grind those gears. But what I came away from listening to the story was that the best data, being looked over with the best minds is the only basis upon which you can cover your ass and survive and lead the way. So I'm hoping that here I got this YouTube recording with you. I'm really bummed that at least a week's worth, if not more, of recordings that went on to record in Facebook, and I thought were much better recorded here on YouTube, and due to technical difficulties, were lost to the YouTube world, but still exist out there on Facebook. So if you stoop to or use somebody else's computer and Facebook, you can find not Michael Miller Pilates, because that's a business page. All my energy happens at Michael Miller. Alright, then blah blah blah. So one of the things I look to do is make this YouTube video private and then post the location of it to my patrons. And just think it, someone actually, well, I shouldn't say it that way. The most fun, I guess, is working on the paradigm. In anticipation of what you see as evidence of what is to come. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, and the world will always... See, nothing will change, nothing changes. The aristocracy will always be the aristocracy. To the point where it won't really even matter and be beneath them to do anything other than acknowledge that yes, there's some kind of ideal within it. And yet, in doing that, it makes Pilates available to mankind. In looking at Pilates in an ideal way, even if it's your ideal rather than my ideal, but in looking at it as something other than determined by intellectuality, rather, let alone baser forms of human expression like culture, the ideal for what it is. So, uniform engagement. And I'm here to, it's like, hold up my hands and say I'm sorry to admit it, or but this point of view is one view out of a bunch. And luckily you can find your own sensation in it if you want to go there. But the way to uniform engagement is through core new tension. It's not because I make that up, it's because I'm just pointing to the fact of the way the body engages itself to move through space. This is biomechanics. It's way more rooted to being human, but biomechanics, well, see, it's really tough for me to separate the two. But you could be aware of and engage in core new tension and never do a lick of Pilates in terms of performance. Now you might say, in doing core new tension, you're obviously doing Pilates. Well, that would be nice if you thought that way, but Depends on how you define Pilates. How do I define Pilates? Uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. That's the definition of MMP. What's your definition? Do you have a definition? In your way of looking at it, is it even definable? See? Pilates is as ethereal as a multicolored mist in a Moroccan restaurant. I'm just trying to broadcast one point of view that's an ideal point of view that's based in biology and physics. I didn't quite say that right because it's based on a theory that an ideal exists within Joe's original work based on the evidence of his definition, his promise, and his sequence. Out of my pursuit at trying to understand that, I came to identify core new tension, oppositional rotation between axes, and easier to do core new tension and then explain the definition of MMP, which is uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. So when you get confronted by someone contestorially asking you, how do I know if something I make up is Pilates or not? Well, in that mist, it can be tough to tell and depend upon where you stand based on what you see. At least for me, with you, if you know the MMP definition, and ideally by heart, and ideally being able to explain what those words mean and where they came from out of Joe's original work. If you can take somebody, anybody, from where they're at on a gondola ride up to look around, and you can explain CT and MMP, they may not like the ride and they may not like the view, and they may rather stay within a culture that they're familiar with and doesn't go there. My point all along is you're trying to survive gravity. And Joe's choreography, the progressive loading in his mat. So know the definition by heart. Because that means you know 3 things in Joe's book, really well, and see, that's just it. If you have the PowerPoint presentation in your hand that lists those 5 things, you can just stand in front of or sit in front of a group of people and tell them or read to them right off of your phone what those 5 things are. You could also take what's on the phone and broadcast it to a mega screen behind you. My point is that there's at least the rudiments of a tool there that allows you to present these 5 things as a point of view, that as a presentation that some might find valuable. And that it might have some small impact, or none maybe, but at least reinforce wherever else you're coming from as a Pilates instructor, to being aware of the MMP point of view as an ideal that exists within thousands of, attributions of what Pilates is, or that it isn't really anything at all, or, there's a paradox, okay? I got to write that one down. The paradox between Pilates not being anything in particular to allow for its monetization and personalization and human expression, and to where that interplays with Pilates having an essence of its own, and whether you like it or not, believe it or not, it can be true. It can be true, period. So here I am very distinctly saying that if you want to work the body uniformly, it takes core new tension. Oh, that guy sounds like I sound like. It takes core new tension. Write to me, How do you get alignment in your body? How do you make alignment in your body sensational? Not intellectual, but that how can you feel when you're lined up? Maybe your image is better than mine. But in any regard, an image is one thing, but biomechanics is another, and this one point of view acknowledges core new tension in the body as a means of moving through space to survive the gravity dragon, dinosaur. All right, wavering in and out of nowhere to go but some notes to go by. Hopeful that this YouTube broadcast, and then I'm not sure at all to go into Facebook or not. It seems like something to do, but I'm not sure. Well, except linear and dynamic. That was the best thing today. Linear and dynamic. And why linear is nice to be able to be strung like a bridge and be hanging in alignment. I'm speaking open leg rocker. But to the extent that you turn on your endpoints and unlock your joints at elbows and knees, you gain a more uniform distribution of your musculature. And that's sensational. So if you can't find that and don't get there with your own sensation, by all means, we just didn't connect. But that's the bottom line, not bottom line really, from this broadcast. It's about uniform engagement. How do I get more uniform engagement? How do I get all the muscles to play like a symphony? And you don't get them to play like a symphony, one instrument at a time. They have to practice all working together. And it really helps if thinking has been introduced to, or if imagery has been introduced to thinking, where thinking can embrace where it's aiming for in space, its posture, and its means of engagement in getting there. And so the aim, I'd say, is like alignment, or being sensitive to, being able to be aligned in any position in space. Like in the long body on the ladder barrel, going out before you go up. So, don't give away or be obvious the key that you have to live broadcast. And that's the key caution about if you go do that. Live can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Evaluate points of view. Then add 2 and 2. Direct your thinking. Geist.